So these new tariffs are considered President Trump's toughest trade move against China. Here to walk us through the latest is CBSN contributor Willis Sparks. He writes for Signal, a newsletter produced by GZERO Media. Good to see you again,
Hello
Willis.
again.
All right, so let's talk about this. Are we headed for a global trade war?
Probably not, because neither side really wants this. There's a lot of posturing going on the two sides.
It. He's been talking about it since he announced his candidacy.
Everybody says they want a war because that strengthens their negotiating position. But there is a risk of a trade war, even though no one really wants one, because, as I think I've said on this program before, on the one hand, President Trump is right when he says that the Chinese economy is more vulnerable than the U.S. economy. But President Xi Jinping of China is right when he says President Trump is more vulnerable politically than he is. And so, you know, when you look at the list of potential areas that the Chinese might hit back on, you know, it may increasingly affect, you know, the lives of people in states like Michigan and Pennsylvania and Iowa, states that are going to be very important for President Trump in 2020.
Soybean
farmers in Iowa, very good piece in the Des Moines Register on this subject just yesterday. So the point is that both sides are feeling confident. And that's how you get the risk of a conflict, that no one really wants the conflict. But if both of them think that they hold the upper hand, they have less incentive to pull back as things maybe potentially escalate.
But China doesn't have to really do sort of a tit-for-tat tariff situation. I mean, they can just pull back their support with the North Korean agenda. They can decide, you know what, how about we lift some of the sanctions that we agreed to?
Well, on North Korea, China has its own interests, and China has its own reasons to put pressure on North Korea that have nothing to do with what the U.S. wants. I would say that the tariffs that China has reportedly considering is technically not a response to what Trump announced yesterday. It's technically a response to the steel and aluminum tariffs that were announced a few days ago. So there's still another shoe to drop in terms of what the Chinese may. But these are all, as we were saying during the break, these are all opening positions. They're negotiating tactics. So President Trump was saying there are as many as 1,000 different goods that could be subject to tariffs, but we're going to listen to American business before we finalize this. The steel and aluminum tariffs I was just mentioning, President Trump imposed tariffs of 25% on steel, except that the 6 largest exporters of steel to the U.S. are all exempt. Canada, Mexico, now the EU, Brazil, South Korea. So I wouldn't attach too much significance to the actual numbers or the list of products yet. These are opening positions in what both sides hope are going to strengthen their bargaining position, that they can get together and make a deal that averts the worst of this. But markets don't know that, and there is a risk of escalation here.
Let's talk John Bolton. He
Yes.
is to be the new national security advisor. This is an individual who some people believe has extreme ideas when it comes to our foreign policy, specifically as it relates to Russia, specifically as it relates to Iran and North Korea. All 3 of those countries major touch points for this presidency. How do you see it, Brett?
I would go further than saying some people believe this. 3 years ago, as you mentioned in the last segment, 3 years ago, Mr. Bolton wrote an op-ed that says, bomb Iran.
Right.
3 weeks ago, he wrote an essay for the Wall Street Journal that said there is a legal basis to strike North Korea. As if this is a legal question.
Right.
This is not a legal question. The reason you don't strike North Korea is because you could have millions of people die in a few days, not because it might be illegal under international law. So,
and he's talked about punching back at Russia, and because of their cyber warfare.
Well, now, there's an important point here, though, that on the Russia issue, Mr. Bolton is closer to Trump, because Bolton has actually expressed some skepticism that Russia was involved in the U.S. election, for example, despite the fact that the U.S. intelligence community says unanimously that they were. So, you know, Mr. Bolton is generally hawkish. He is fairly called a neoconservative. But on that particular issue, he's closer to Trump. Now, the really important, the interesting divergence between Trump and Bolton, maybe they'll talk about this someday, is that Trump, during the campaign for president, described the war in Iraq, led by George W. Bush, as a huge, colossal, catastrophic mistake. And John Bolton was one of the people who made the principal argument in favor of going to war in Iraq. So they haven't historically agreed on everything. But if this is the guy who is going to have the last word with the president on issues like the Iran nuclear deal and how to manage relations with North Korea, then the way that I put it in the newsletter is Trump is a man who likes to throw punches. This is his style. Bolton also a punch thrower. So I think given the fact that we're talking about the government of the world's only superpower, that's something that raises a lot of risk.
Real quickly, can people who may disagree with Mr. Bolton on some of those positions, can they expect that the Defense Secretary, General James Mattis, to be that one voice, that moderating voice? Because now with McMaster gone, he's really sort of the lone.
That's right.
Yeah.
The sort of the last guy standing who may be able to stand in the way of what the president seems to be doing, which is surrounding himself with enablers.
And I'm really glad that you bring up Mattis, because he's the one name that we're not talking about, because he's the one name that's not rumored to be leaving or has already left. With Tillerson gone and now McMaster out, and maybe John Kelly's not going to be chief of staff much longer, we don't know. Mm-hmm. But Secretary Mattis, the defense secretary, is still the voice of, I'm speaking on behalf of the defense establishment here, and you need to take this seriously, Mr. President, et cetera. But again, he works over at the Pentagon, a few miles from the White House.
Bolton is there.
Bolton is in the room.
House, right.
And I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people are concerned here.